If you're a computer science student, then you've probably been told that you should get projects on your resume if you want to get a software engineering internship. And the reason is that it's the solution that you need job experience to get a job, but you need a job to get job experience. Well, projects that you give yourself job experience. But every time somebody gets told that they should build a project, the inevitable question is, but what project? What project are you talking about? What are these projects that you speak of? And in today's video, I'm going to be telling you how to pick a project for your resume. My name is Alex. I was a Google intern and now I'm going full-time at Datadog. And if you're interested in the role that projects play on your resume and in the interview process, then be sure to subscribe because that video is coming out soon. So when picking a project, there's a couple main questions that you need to answer, and that's what technologies are you going to use and what are you actually going to build? What is your project going to accomplish? You also need to decide between breadth versus depth and what projects you want to build. And if you're in school, then ideally you can use the classes you're taking to your advantage. And if you're not particularly interested into spending a bunch of time trying to pick what project you want to do and you just need me to tell you something that you can go Google, then the answer is Pern Stack Guide. P-E-R-N. That's PostgreSQL, ExpressJS, React.js, and Node.js. That's going to build what we call a full stack web app. A full stack web app has a database to store your information, a back end to serve your information from the database to the website, and a front end that actually presents the information and is the website that you interact with. So if you Google Pern Stack Guide, that's going to teach you how to build a full stack web application, and then you can then go replicate Twitter or build a workout tracking app, just really any simple website that you have to interact with, store, and retrieve information. In the process of doing that, you're going to build a REST API, and that's important because it shows that you not only have computer science experience through your degree, but a REST API is really a software engineering concept, and recruiters like to see well-rounded candidates. So if you just need to Google something, that's what it is. The technology that you pick is really going to determine kind of what you learn and what subfield of software engineering you get experience in. It's important to note that the type of technology you use is likely going to reflect in what companies become the most interested in you in the future. But because these are just projects and they're only supposed to take a weekend or maybe a couple weeks of consistent work, don't feel like you're pigeonholing yourself. One good way to understand what technologies you might want to learn is to go to the job description for software engineering roles at companies whose products you enjoy or you're interested in working for, and just read, they're going to have a list of technologies that they want their software engineers to understand. Pick one of them and kind of try to get a feel for how you might build with it. Once you have the answer to what technology you want to use, figuring out how you want to apply that technology is really as simple as just Googling around or emulating what someone else did with that technology yourself. And vice versa, if you have an idea that you want to build a particular application, then you can Google around to figure out what technologies might suit you the most. You really only need the answer to one question of what technology and what application, and then from there you can Google the rest. In picking a technology though, you have to strike a balance of complexity. You don't want something that's gonna hold your hand too much, like say Flask and Python. If you do that, you're not gonna learn as much as you might by doing something like Node.js, which is a little bit more bare bones. You're gonna have to write a little bit more code yourself, but in doing so, you're actually gonna understand like the substance of what you're doing. And when you're in the interview, it's gonna lead to much better conversations and overall be much more impressive on your resume for just a little bit more work. On the opposite extreme, if you wanna build a website, don't go into low-level C programming. Something in the middle, either a hobbyist class technology or maybe just the bare bones implementation of something that the entire industry uses as a whole. For example, a ton of people use React to build front-end websites, even at major companies, but you don't necessarily need to use, say, Next.js or Redux or interact with the JavaScript DOM directly or TypeScript. Like, these are all additives to the technology that if you want to go deeper into the project, you can experiment with, but just to get started, go to the React documentation, do their basic tutorial, and just work with what the React documentation itself is kind of telling you to do. Don't go too deep into extra tutorials from other people who are potentially in industry and have a different target audience than just a computer science student trying to get a project on their resume. When it comes to the breadth versus depth of projects, what I mean is, would you rather have, say, 5 projects that are each 2 to 3 lines on your resume, or just 2 projects that each take up 6 lines on your resume? I don't think those numbers add up. Anyways, and really the answer here is that it doesn't particularly matter. If you find a project that you're passionate about, that you want to go deep in, then by all means, go deep. Recruiters are going to love it, and it's going to show really well when you're applying to companies that are using that particular technology, but your application might not be as strong to, say, a computer graphics this company if all of your experience is in back-end web development. On the other hand, if you're still experimenting and you don't know exactly what subfield of software engineering you want to go into yet, that's okay. Build a few small projects and leave them half finished if you don't get them done in time, or if you feel like they're just dragging along and you're not enjoying it or you're not learning that much more. It's okay to have a project be half finished and still have it on your resume. Just talk about what you did accomplish and what you learned in the lines on your resume, and that's satisfactory. No one's really looking at the project code. In terms of using your computer science degree to your advantage, say that you had an algorithms class that had you implement Dijkstra's in Java, then maybe you can build a website that lets the user interact with that algorithm that's being hosted on a web server on the back end. That way you wind up with a multifaceted project that is both deep and wide, and it looks really good on your resume. It's important to note that nobody's forcing you to build these projects, so you might not be as motivated and you might not be as productive as, say, a computer science class with a deadline and a partner. In many ways, the hardest part of actually doing these projects is the productivity aspect. And figuring out how to learn when there is no, say, structure to the curriculum. You're gonna Google Pern Stat Guide, you're not gonna know what half of the words in the acronym means, and then you're gonna have to go and Google those. You're almost running a depth-first search on the information tree that is a given web stack. And just Googling the definitions of definitions until you have some understanding of what's going on really is the best way to learn a lot of these software engineering concepts, and it's how you're gonna have to learn things on the job one day. The project you pick is really going to determine your success rate by making sure you have technologies that don't hold your hand too much but also aren't too bare bones and are relatively within the sphere of something that you're naturally curious in or are confident in Googling. That's going to set you up for success so that when you do have to be productive, there's not that many barriers. And if the project you picked is at an adequate level of complexity that will be challenging but understandable, that way you can avoid tutorial hell where you're really just following these 6-hour tutorials, copy pasting their code, not necessarily understanding what's going on. You really want to avoid that and just dive straight into the flat documentation for the different tools you're using. Yes, tutorials are going to be really useful for, say, setting up your development environment, because that's something that the documentation for a particular tool or technology might not cover. But once you have your development environment set up, you've done some very simple tutorials just to get the hang of just how to, turn things on, get a website running on your local machine. At that point, that's when you should go straight to the documentation for the different technologies that you're using. Have a little write-up with some goals for what you want the actual project to do. Make sure you don't, say, increase the scope of your project. You're not reinventing the wheel, and you shouldn't get too out of hand to the point where you're building an entire startup. It doesn't have to be pretty. The code doesn't have to be pretty. The website doesn't have to be pretty. The goal here is to learn different technologies and become a well-rounded software engineer. The last note for picking a project is keep in mind that computer science and software engineering are not the same. And you might want to pick something like, say, building a REST API or interacting with GitHub in some more complicated ways that are going to be more applicable to you on the job and potentially lead to better conversations in interviews when interviewers are asking about the different projects that you build. But if you want to learn about the role that projects play on your resume, in interviews, and on the job, like I said, subscribe. That's the next video that's coming out. Peace.